I'm not going to do the same intro as the last episode. I'm just going to do a different intro. Hi.
Hello
It's an
again, in a
episode
week
of-
that wasn't the same week.
This is another riveting, and I do mean riveting. Clap. Airborne. Fuck.
Airborne Sealife, everyone.
You had one job.
And you fucked it up, but we love you, and we can all still be friends.
Welcome to another episode of Airborne Sealife. I'm Manuel. I'm joined by Brendan and this other guy. What's your name again? Oh, Yusuf.
Oh, my name is also Manuel Barbara. Pleased to meet you.
No. You are Zom. Sorry.
No,
never mind.
I
That's
am
an
the
inside
real
joke.
Matthew Shaw. I can't make that joke here. Inside jokes aside, welcome to another riveting episode of the Airborne Sealife podcast, of course, where we talk about all things nonsense, all things metal, and all things fun, right?
Right.
Fun.
Right.
The state says clap.
Yeah.
Speaking of fun.
Speaking of fun, we get to have fun with this episode.
Speaking of state
I get to have
mandated fun.
I get to have some state mandated
Thanks
fun
you,
here. No.
George Orwell.
Before we get to that, why don't Brendan fill us in with the news?
Yeah, what do we got?
Well, gentlemen, and everyone in between, I don't know what that means, but do it. I don't know.
Between the gentlemen.
Yes.
I don't know how that works. Don't at me. We have a very significant piece of news. A very legendary metal band, all-girl metal band, Kitty, has gone right into the recording studio and have streamed their very first song in 13 years, man. That's pretty wild. 13 years. It's. I never thought I'd get to say that again, man.
That's a lot of time. I know, to be fair, I know nothing about this band. Why don't you explain them to me?
God, what is the best way to explain Kitty as a concept? You know what, Yusuf? I'm finally going to give you one. You ready for this? Kitty is a Canadian metal band from London, Ontario.
London, Ontario, Canada.
London-
That's only 2.5 hours away from me. And from Rush.
Yep. So, it was the brainchild of Fallon Bowman and Mercedes Lander, and it is a very prolific all-girl metal band. They have got some pretty, I would argue, they're just like a good soundtrack of like the late 90s for some people. If you've objectively never listened to Kitty, you really should. Like, this is just a good band to get into. Objectively, they kind of fell off after one of their band members had unfortunately left this world. Unfortunately, that is going to happen. The idea is they have been gone for a while, and now they're back, and they have a new song that has come out, and it's exciting times. It is very exciting times.
Looks like they signed to Sumerian too, which is
They did.
Cool.
I'm going to read the article here. I'm going to read it, and let's get the whole deal here. Kitty is back! ! The band has signed to Sumerian Records, as you just said, and is now streaming the first single in 13 years, Eyes Wide Open. The single was produced and is a sign of things to come from the band. But this is a person who's helped produce bands like the Foo Fighters, Rush, Calm Down Yusuf, Alice in Chains, and Korn. A lot of good 90s going on right there.
A lot of really good 90s, like, good bands on
Well,
your
look,
resume, yeah.
It's like I said, objectively, Kitty is a great band. I don't even want to argue underrated band, but I would argue they don't get nearly as love as they deserve, especially now. They are one of those bands that deserves to be more prolific into the modern age, but just, I don't know. I just feel like the world needs more Kitty. This is your first time hearing of them. This is your call to action to go onto YouTube, go onto Spotify, and go listen to Kitty. You're not, pick any song, you're going to have a good time. That is my objective opinion on the idea.
I'll be doing that when we get done with this.
It's great to see that Kitty is back because we need more fully female bands out there that are kicking ass. Because there are a bunch of bands out in the scene that are doing things right now, notably The Warning. I believe they're from Mexico City. They're somewhere down there. You have bands like No Bro, who are from Montreal, Canada, but they're doing that whole like heavy punk rock, anti-establishment kind of sound. They're kicking ass with that. Another very well-known all-female rock band actually coming out of Toronto, Canada, The Beaches, who have been getting bigger and bigger. And now with Kitty back, and notably also from Southern Ontario, hell yeah, even better for Southern Ontario. It's great to see that fully fronted female bands, that's a mouthful to say fast, coming back and like just doing more in the scene. I'm getting a little annoyed with a lot of bands out there right now that have one female member and they're like, yeah, we have women in the band. Okay, what else?
Well, I mean, look, metal's been a predominantly male-dominated genre for a very long time. Like, from the inception of it, it was literally founded by men, and it's no secret that we don't have enough female representation. It's not enough to me that we just have we have people like Lita Ford, and that's one of the very few upfront names that you can really throw in the thing, and that's not really a justice. But we're 2024, we could do better than this. Again, objectively, when you were looking at it, it's a podcast, again, full of men talking about this, which, I mean, that's again part of the issue, isn't it? Well, not to say that we're the issue. All I'm saying is that metal.
I think Brendan just got us canceled.
We
I did
could
get us
become
canceled.
the problem and then get canceled. Yeah. No, there are a bunch of names that are doing awesome stuff. I mean, like Spirit Box immediately comes to mind.
Also Canadian Spirit Box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have Ginger.
Yeah.
Ginger. She is.
Ginger.
I don't remember her name, but she is
Tatiana?
scary.
Yeah, maybe one of the craziest vocalists out there. Like her and Courtney LaPlante are definitely putting their mark. Well, actually, you look at bands like Arch Enemy. Unfortunately, they aren't a band anymore, but The Agonist before they disbanded, right? Like
definitely
The
Agonist,
Arch Enemy, Nightwish. Those are three iconic bands that have been female fronted.
And Epica, which is like
Epica,
Simone Simmons just basically founded that band.
Seven Spires.
Yes.
We should give a shout out to our friends in Seven Spires. Adrian, Jack, Chris, and of course Peter Albert Durena. We love you guys. There are a lot of females doing some great things in the metal scene. It's nice to see a full female band that's really kicking ass and like getting themselves back out there.
Well, I think that Kitty had a couple of things working against them. Nothing against the music. I think there are a few things that really kind of chained them down a bit in terms of like soaring even higher. First, of course, obviously, they're a new metal band. A lot of new metal didn't really make it past like the mid to late 90s. Even though, look, I'm biasedly, I'm a millennial, grew up with like Disturbed, I grew up with bands like that. They're objectively bands that are products of their time. There's no real working around that. And then you have this, and there's nothing wrong with new metal, obviously, but I think it is almost a very curated flavor of metal for a very curated part of a decade. And there's just other genres that kind of supplanted it. And the other being, the death of Trish Doan. I cannot speak today. I don't know what's going on with me today.
One of those days.
It's just one of those days.
Certainly
it's like
not the same thing that was happening in the other episode.
Oh. It's my point being that it's very difficult for any band to bounce back after a loss of like a absolutely pivotal member. Like when Bolt Thrower lost Martin Kearns, I think that was just the end of Bolt Thrower. I could be wrong. I haven't really checked if they've done anything very recently, but that was a pretty big blow, man. You could also argue that if someone died, there's other kind of crazier ways to get around it. I don't know if people know the exact example I'm alluding to, but Static X, they solved that problem with a mask. It was controversial. It was a very divisive thing to do because on one hand, do you celebrate what it was and just let it be and just end the music, or do you try to continue on in the person's name? You know what? I would argue that the fact that we're even talking about Kitty right now, having them come back and recording the first single, I think there's just something to be said that it's great to see a name like that coming back up into the highlights. It makes me feel that a little piece of Wayback and the Wayback Machine is coming back to the forefront, and that's really cool. I'm really jazzed to see bands like Kitty and Static X coming back to life. It's objectively cool. But what are your thoughts on this idea?
I mean, it's always great when a band that I thought was gone came, like if Slice the Cake came back now and did something. Well, they fell apart multiple times and then fell apart for good. If they just put out an album tomorrow, I'd be ecstatic about it. So, more music is good. More music is good.
I think that's objectively good.
Bands, when they come back, it definitely takes a little bit for them to get their feet wet again, get back into things. But once things start rolling, once the train starts moving, everything feels fine again. You're like, you know what? I'm glad you're back. Hooray. More music is good.
Speaking of music, and bands that don't exist anymore, Yusuf,
don't tell me that.
After you're done crying, why don't you tell us what we're talking about today?
They exist in my heart. Okay, they exist in my heart. Anyway, so today's topic of this episode is 2 songs. Technically, we're not doing 1; we're doing 2. Well, we did 2 for Nail Blue Scars, but you get the idea.
It's objectively 1 song.
It's objectively 1 in the funniest way possible.
The best funniest way.
What might be one of, if not my favorite album of the last decade, and it came out in 2019. And yes, the 2010s were a very long time. I know it was 10 whole years or whatever, right? And a lot of good stuff came out that time, including one of my other favorite albums of all time, Volition by Protest the Hero. Great album, but
also Canadian.
But this album. I can't talk about it in a positive light without laughing because of just how maniacal of a record it is. And to ease the suspense, the record is Terraformer by Thank You Scientist, which was released in June of 2019. And we're going to be talking about New Moon and the title track, Terraformer, which are the last two songs on the album. I'm just going to say this before we start talking about the songs itself. What?
Hey Yusuf, do you know where Thank You Scientist?
Yes, I know they're from New Jersey.
Yusuf, you're losing. You are losing the war. We've
I lost this 4 years ago.
Picked several bands from New Jersey, and it's like a sign that you need to come hang out.
I lost this war a long time ago. Anyway, I will say this about the album before we get into the songs itself. Do yourself a favor, even if you're not into that kind of like prog rock, like crazy horn, like prog rock, jazz fusion kind of thing. It'll change your mind when you listen to this band. It'll actually change your mind. This album alone is a masterpiece. There's only so few albums in the metal world where front to back every single song on that album is a absolute banger. But from beginning to end of this album is the wildest hour and something of your life that you at some point you'll think to yourself, man, I wish I could listen to it again for the first time. That is what this album is. It is just bombastic from front to back. Anyway, let's talk about this because it is one of my favorite moments in this entire album when New Moon comes in and the way it just punches you in the head into Terraformer.
I've repeatedly called this the biggest fuck you I have ever seen a band do ever.
It's just
because we have nice, pretty Chinese instrument. Like, I don't know much about Chinese
I think
music,
it's an
but
air
I hear
hoop.
this and I'm like, this sounds like Chinese music. And then, beautiful vocals, and then a violin starts, and then harmonics start, and then it's just, what the hell just happened?
Okay, Brendan, what are your thoughts on this song on this all this because I want to hear your stuff first, and then Manuel and I can go from there.
Oh boy, I can definitely see why you wanted to talk about this one because for me, there really isn't as much of a narrative to this as it is something where it's a nasty trick to play on someone because like the whole point of the song is the two songs. First off, this is a very particular example of what you were doing, exactly what you did because it's like you said that you get lulled in with this nice like Asian instruments and it's like very beautiful and whimsical, and then out of nowhere they pick up the exact notes they were just coming off of and go into a cacophony. Comparatively, it's not even necessarily a song that's groundbreaking in terms to me of a Thank You Scientist song. It's exactly what I would be expecting, but its delivery is more impactful because of that forcible letting of the guard down. I've got to just tell you, like, it's just consistently music that they produce. It's like you said, it's just this very nice kind of jazz fusion-y. I almost at the time called it like jazz ska aggressive fusion kind of thing because it's very technical jazz. It's more technical ska. I don't know how to explain it to someone. How do you explain Thank You Scientist to someone who's literally never listened to it before? As
someone that did a literal master's thesis on the band, I don't know how you can explain it. And I did a fucking thesis about this band.
That's the point.
This fucking piece of paper right here above my head, this little white square, that is my master's degree from the University of Toronto, where for that thesis project, for my research, I did it entirely on this album, and I cannot explain to you how to describe this band.
That's the thing.
Like 2 years of research. Nothing.
The point is they're very technical, but it's deceptive. Look, the track itself, like any good Thank You Scientist song, is deceptive in its simplicity. Because it is, even I know, as someone who did not go to music school, someone who's a bit of a lapsed musician, I know for a fact that this is something where it sounds very straightforward, but if you were to go into the actual work, every single note is done in such a way where it is this tightly packed, very insanely structured composition. And it's never the same.
I mean, it does a lot of development of its themes. It has a lot of stuff that keeps coming back and keeps changing and being modified, and it holds it all together and keeps it moving throughout the entire piece, which is how you write a good piece of big brain music like this is.
Yeah. Also, their idea of thematic direction was one thing. This band cracks me the fuck up, man. I love telling the story. 2014 was when I first saw them live. It was the first time I ever heard of them. They were opening for Coheed and Cambria. I went with my sister took me. So we go see the show. They're about to get on stage, and I out loud was like, what the fuck is a thank you scientist? And they walk out on stage. I see the horns and I see a violin, and I go, I'm gonna like this, aren't I? And they start playing Feed the Horses from their first full-length album, Maps of Non-Existent Places, which is also one of my favorite albums. It's got that just heavy opening, and you're like, what the fuck? This is nice. This is cool. The horns of doing some blowing, violin solo comes in. You're like, oh damn. And then it just like hits you, just slaps you in the face that it goes into this funky ass groove, and you're like, excuse me, what did you, huh? But the thing, it works so well because it's so subtle. What I love about the way they write is subtlety is like subtlety is like a chef's kiss to them, because they do things in such a wild yet subtle way where it'll happen, and at first you go, oh cool, and then you realize something, it's completely different. You go, how do they get there? When did they get there? What just happened?
It's subtle, and it's also not subtle, because half the time there's like, yeah, we just did that.
Yeah, they're like, we just did that, and you're just going to deal with it. And the reason I bring this up with subtlety is they've really gotten clever with transitioning into songs on Terraformer, which they didn't really do a ton of in Maps or in Stranger Heads Prevail, their second album. I talk about this because there's obviously the transition of New Moon into Terraformer, where it's still, the violins coming in are still part of the ending of New Moon. And what you don't realize is the harmonics on a fretless guitar that Tom Mondo is doing end up becoming part of it, and you don't notice it.
Yeah. I didn't realize that this was a fretless guitar until years after I had first heard it. I just thought he was using like a whammy pedal or something, and then someone told, I think it was you who told me, oh, it's a fretless guitar. Like, what the?
And it's so subtle that the harmonics on a fretless guitar come in, and you're like, oh, that's kind of pretty. And then it just kicks into the opening of Terraformer, and you're like, holy shit, what the fuck? And, going backwards.
And then that theme keeps coming back.
Yeah. And then going
over
what's
and over
fun,
and over
what's
again,
fun is going backwards. If you look at the first two songs on the album, Wrinkle and then Foxmolder, right? It's the same idea with subtlety into the transition, but there's a big difference here. The big difference is that whereas Wrinkle has that break at the end, the ba-da-da-da-da-da, ba-da, right? And it just ends there. There's that little moment to breathe. Ba-da, band comes off, and then the synth comes in at the end after the entire band is gone. The do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do, right? And then that transitions into the beginning of the beginning of Foxmolder. Whereas, like, there's that break in between. There's that moment of rest where you're like, oh, okay. Then you hear the transition, you go, okay, new song. With New Moon and Terraformer, it is truly, and I love agreeing with Manuel on this, it is like the biggest fuck you ever, because there's no moment of break at the end of New Moon. The violins come in, you're like, that's really pretty. And then you're like, is that a guitar? And then, and just, you're like, what the fuck, man? Oh, I get goosebumps thinking about this band. This is such good writing. It's such good writing.
Well, the song's a sucker punch. And I think the transition is a reflection of the self-awareness. Like, I think they know full well, first off, they knew what they were doing. Like, I know I've said it before, but they knew what they were doing.
For years, they've known what they were doing. Yeah.
But they know people have an expectation of what's to come. And they know that, like, there's things like, okay, I wonder what the transition is going to be like this time. It's a punch in the face. It's a rug pull. It's literally anything that it's literally stepping up the stairs and thinking there's an extra step. That is the feeling they've captured in this exact moment of time. The songs are almost not important. It's the distance between the two songs. And in this particular case, the absence of that distance. It's literally one song that has one song running into the next, and a complete not broadcasting that it's going to happen. And I think that's the genius of it. Not every band knows their audience, and not every band can really read the room in that way. You know what I mean? And I think that it takes a very specific expertise to know exactly how to pull the rug over someone's eyes like that.
Yeah, it really does. And to do it so smoothly, because you don't know what's going to happen. until that guitar starts, but it's the same idea before that.
I think it's not even just the transition. It's almost just a continuation of the theme of the previous song, just louder and angrier and abrupt.
Yep.
And that's why it's so brilliantly crafted together, which is what did it for me. Like, it really, like, you can really see why Yusuf especially really wanted to talk about it. It's objectively genius in my summation of this.
The thing I can talk about is there's certain moments, well, not even moments, I think like all of New Moon as a song, I love to listen to a lot more now because of just how ambient it is, if that's the word to use. Atmospheric, that's the word. Atmospheric. Mm-hmm. I believe it's an air hoot. I might be wrong. Ben Karras, if you're out there and you find this, please correct me. It's fine. And just, that matched with Sal's vocals of just how pretty and atmospheric everything becomes, especially in the climax of the middle of New Moon, right? When the chorus comes back in, just, it's so, like, it doesn't even feel like an explosion almost. It feels like just like a fountain, just very, very pretty. Just
it's very cinematic.
It is very cinematic.
It's very
That's
cinematic.
a good way to put it. It is very cinematic.
It's very clear evoking of imagery.
Yeah, it starts to simmer a little bit, right, and just gets quieter and quiet. It starts getting softer, and you start to really appreciate the way they're able to, like, manage those peaks and valleys with something so straightforward compared to everything else they've done, and they've done a lot of wild-ass shit. And then Terraformer coming in, where it's just this, super just in-your-face kind of very rock and rolly, but in a thank you scientist way, the only way that they could. My favorite thing, I don't know why I love this so much, but it's like stuck in my head for the last like few days since I've been re-listening to the song.
The experience of listening to this for the first time, like not knowing, because okay, they're not going to end it on this big pretty ballad, but I don't think anyone was expecting that transition.
Anyone that even if you've listened to like a little bit of this band, they're not ending on something like pretty and cute. They have to end it in the most them way possible, and this was it. And what I love, and I want to bring this up. Second verse of that song, there's no prototypical, goes back to like a very like groovy horn thing, right? That freaking breakdown with the vocals on top of it, boom, boom, like, just the way it all happens, that power in Sal's voice, it's just driving, it's just getting you.
Yep.
It's like,
and it still feels very, very much like a big band tune.
It
in
does,
a lot of ways.
yeah. It's got this driving force to it. There's that low end that just like, it's keeping everything anchored, and you're like, oh my god. I really mean it when I say every song on this album's masterpiece. Brendan, you were saying, sorry.
Oh no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to agree with the fact it's a big band that like really just went to a lot of math class. That's my takeaway on that. Just precision, just a precision crafted big band.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention, Manuel, that freaking guitar solo.
Yeah, what a solo. I think that's also on a fretless.
I believe that's also on a fretless, yeah.
But I don't even know what to say about that solo. It's so good.
The whole solo, what happens underneath the solo with the band, I think is truly a testament to just how creative they are in their writing process. And this is something I gathered when I was getting my research done about the album and I ended up talking to Tom and Ben about it for about an hour. One thing Tom was telling me and Ben were telling me about their writing processes. One of them will come up and someone will come up with an idea, and then they'll just get in like all together for writing, and then they'll just start throwing ideas out there, see what sticks, see what doesn't, and see how they can mesh all their ideas together to create this whatever monstrosity they're working on. And it's so fun to hear like what horn parts are happening underneath like a guitar solo, what Ben's playing on the violin, background things they're doing, and then you hear after the solo or before the solo if a verse comes back in or if chorus comes back in, or even just like the nastiest breakdown you'll ever hear for them, how they incorporate horns and a violin. Because I think a lot of metal bands per se that like doing that kind of stuff, adding a horn or like having some strings in there, they'll use that for mainly padding. Whereas I think with Thank You Scientist, because they are all very, very good players, they use that to their advantage where they can do whatever the heck they want. And this is not related to these two songs in particular, but in Fox Mulder, it's the part, Manuel, after the saxophone solo, before that last chorus, it's like a horn solo kind of bit. Remember what I'm talking about? The do,
yeah,
do,
I know exactly what you're talking
do,
about.
do, 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 and the guitar's playing that line too, and they're just and you're like, huh, that's actually kind of fun.
I think there's an interesting difference between how they use the horn section and how more traditional metal bands that use horns treat that, because it's kind of a semi-open secret that low brass actually blends super, super well with electric guitars, and it makes it sound just nasty and disgusting, and a lot of metal bands will want to use it for that. They're treating it more like a jazz band. It's less like an orchestra, and they're treating it more like a jazz band or a big band, where the horns are free to do all this really bouncy, fun stuff. It does make it, I don't know if there's a way to be heavy when there's a trumpet going doo-doo-doo-doo over top of something, but it makes it fun for sure.
Though I think the way you look at any Thank You Scientist song, from this one to a song like Automatic Blue, it's all a giant puzzle. Every piece of it has a purpose. Every piece of it is so finely machined to fit into place, and it's so tightly just pieced in such a way that it just makes objective sense to put together. There's not a lot of bands out there that could just do what Thank You Scientist does, because there's just it's like every song is a finely tailored suit where every detail to the last thread has its purpose. There is no missed notes. There is no misplaced rhythm. There is no misplaced horn section. It all just works because they know exactly where it's supposed to go. They know exactly the compliments it's supposed to do. And I think that's why it's so difficult to explain the whole concept of Thank You Scientist to people, because it's objectively something so uniquely one of a kind that there is no comparing it to anything. To me, the band itself, it would be like trying to explain the color red to a blind person. There is no parallel. There is no translating that to someone who is, let alone someone who doesn't have a musical training background, any kind of classical training. It just can't be done. I think the best way to look at even just this song is just to experience it and just see what it brings to you after the fact. We can talk about it all day, but at the end of the day, this is kind of a band where you really have to dive in and just let it do its thing. You have to trust the process of this band.
You just got to go for the ride.
And it's not just one song. You really objectively should take an entire album, sit down, get comfortable, and go from A to B through the song and see what it's trying to tell you. A lot of bands are designed for singles. I would argue a good Thank You Scientist song is demanding to be played in sequence to everything in that album, because there's no accident to why they order these songs the way they do. It's not just, we recorded a bunch of things and we just wanted to stuff the album together. From beginning to end, it is a manicured experience that is intended to experience in the correct order, I think.
That's a lot of the other music we've talked about on this show, especially the proggier stuff. The albums themselves are an experience that you are meant to experience sequentially.
But I think more so for Thank You Scientist, because there really is to me, comparing them to any other band on Earth. It's just, you can't. Really there's no parallel, and that's why it's so important that you any band, there's always some band that sounds like someone else. If you lumped them into the category of Tesseract, there's going to be okay, I can see why you would listen to that band too, and X, Y, and Z. There is no band on Earth that can even be remotely be put adjacent to me. Again, this is just, maybe I'm being subjective here. It's especially important for a band like Thank You Scientist, because there is no other band like them. You really have to go through a process to see what that band is saying, because there is no side-by-side comparison. It just doesn't work.
The thing I think about, and this is something I really had to dive into for my research when I was working on my thesis, talking about influences and everything of the band, and I'm okay, well, you can definitely hear 80s fusion movement in there, Mahavishnu, all these things, right? Because my paper was very much dedicated to how Thank You Scientist was basically born out of that movement, those influences. And when I asked the guys about it, they were yeah, we got those, but Ben also studied classical violin, so there's a whole lot of Bach in there. There's a whole lot of other composers in there. They're talking about like their favorite ska bands and their favorite metal bands they would grow up listening to. There are so many bands that influence this one group in particular that, not even to the people that haven't gone to music school, people that have gone to music school, trying to explain anything about them is impossible because there's so much detail that, yeah, they play, the guys talk about it. It's not as like complicated as it really should be. I guess not. Oh my God, trying to pinpoint where everything is like impossible. And I will say this, as someone that has covered a Thank You Scientist song live, when you start to understand the little whimsical details of like their writing, you start to wonder to yourself, where the fuck did they come from? Because they just sort of showed up and took over.
That's what I mean. I think it's not even just that. It's like all these elements that objectively, on some level, you would never in a million years assume that they could work together. And somehow it just does. I think that's why, look, you're listening to a podcast right now where we're trying to tell you, you know what, there really is no way to describe them. It sounds like a lazy answer. It realistically is one of the only answers we can give you.
The only way I have to describe them is they're the only band I've heard make a mariachi metal tune and make it actually work.
Yeah, it's just all the elements separate. Still not sound like that would come close to each other.
There's things that they've done that how do I put this? I'm gonna make a comparison here. This isn't like a one-to-one, but like hear me out here. There are things I talk about with, Manuel knows this, with the most recent Sleep Token record, where my whole point is there are certain things that metal bands do that, you know, they'll do it as a one-off, like they'll put like a rap verse or something, and it's sort of a cliche when they do it, right? There's no commitment to the bit. It's just like a 30-second, maybe 20-second moment in a song. Never happens again. Sleep Token's different, where they commit fully to that whole rap, rock, rap, metal kind of vibe with like the R&B, the trap beats, all that kind of stuff, right? The same idea goes to Thank You Scientist, where bands will do things like have like a weird samba section or like a random mariachi sample, like there's one trumpet or something like that. A lot of bands do that as a bit. I've never seen a band commit to something so ridiculous like Thank You Scientist. They have all these ideas and they do them. They do them well, and they do them with the full-fledged commitment of the band, like, yeah, we're going hard on this. And they've done the mariachi thing like multiple times in different songs on different albums, and every time they do it, you scratch your head a little bit and you go, how did they make it better? Because they have. It's unexplainable. Truly, they are a one-of-a-kind band that I think is going to be really hard to replicate, especially with the fact that the way, Brendan, as you were saying, all these pieces together you would think shouldn't necessarily work well together, but they found a way to blend everything and create this puzzle that you look at multiple times and you can go, I never noticed that detail there, even though I've seen this puzzle now like already multiple times. How did all these pieces fit together like that? Because you have a horn section, you have Tom doing whatever the hell he wants on a guitar, you have Ben being one of the craziest violinists I've ever heard with a pedal board. What caps it off the most is the way Sal's vocals fit into everything they do, and the way they're able to shape things around Sal's vocals. Like that, I don't want to call it the nucleus of their compositional ideas. One of those things where like any other kind of vocalist, it doesn't work. Yes, no?
I would argue that because
here's the thing, I think about this with like higher ranged male vocalists, so like Claudio Sanchez from Coheed and Cambria, Anthony Green from Circa Survive. They're just to name two I can think of off the top of my head. Even like Spencer Sotelo to a point, not maybe that high of range, but you could kind of get where I'm going with this. You try to put that puzzle piece into the already existing Thank You Scientist puzzle. Like you try to fit that into where Sal's piece is. You can't. And it's not to say that they're not good they're all incredible vocalists. It's just that there's a different kind of energy that is brought when all those pieces are put together. And you take one piece out and it's a completely different puzzle.
See, I think those vocalists are puzzle pieces that fit into more contemporary examples of compositional music.
Yeah.
And you would really, here's the thing, you would have to file down the edges and do things to really change what makes them objectively a complete picture of their respective bands. That's the thing. You have distinctive vocalists. Like you go to like a band like System of a Down, you have like Serj Tankian. There, to me, would be no other vocalist who could fit that role because his voice is so distinctively, for me, System of a Down, because it's just this so characteristic, like, yeah, talking about 90 bands again, it's so characteristically System of a Down. The whole point is you can't take vocalists of any of these aforementioned bands, take them out of there and fit them into a piece of Thank You Scientist. Because of what I had said earlier, every piece of everything that they do is a custom machined, individual, unique art installation. It is not just a song, it is a art installation statement piece that does what it's going to do. There's no tin on which to read the label. The second you think you are going to listen to a Thank You Scientist song and think you know what's going to happen next, you have not been listening to that band. That's why it's so difficult to get to anyone a adequate summation of not only these two songs, but Thank You Scientist as a whole. Like I said before, my entry to them was back when I was still in WSAU, and I put on Automatic Blue. It had not been anything I had ever heard in my entire life. It was this distinctive, it was this unique and flavorful, and I was immediately enamored with this song. I'm a guy who doesn't really listen to bands like ska or anything like that, but the way they used those instruments transfixed me into the song. If you were to ask me what genre of music's Thank You Scientist, the closest answer I could give you is fusion. There is no one label. There isn't. It's not possible. I can't do it.
Yep. I think I've had them labeled as like progressive jazz fusion.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe that's the best we're going to get. I would say the whole of it is sublime, and not in like the, pretentious, like, oh, it's sublime. Sublime in the sense that it is this incomprehensible, indescribable experience that you get in looking to something that you cannot adequately put a description to.
I think about this now whenever how do you describe a band like this? Basically the entire episode, which is hilarious that we've got into more of a conversation about the band itself than the song, but the song is a very good representation of what the band is, as well as like everything else they've written. Something a friend of mine once told me. I asked him, what did you think the first time I showed you Thank You Scientist? And he goes, I don't think I said anything. I think my eyes just widened and I went, oh. I go, yeah, that sounds about right. That was my first reaction. Manuel, do you remember your reaction when we sat down and listened to Terraformer?
Yeah, it was like way late at night in your house. I don't remember what I said. It was an experience.
I think we got to, I think it was Swarm, and you sort of turned around, you looked at me, and you went, I hate these guys.
That's an objectively wrong takeaway, but okay.
Yeah. And I'm like, no, you know what? You hate these guys in the weirdest way possible because I love them. We all do. But man, there are some things you listen to where you're like, I wish I could do that. And it's hard. We've talked about this with, Manuel went into this when we were talking about Earthside a few weeks ago with All We Knew and Ever Loved. Everyone wants to, everyone that's a fan of that stuff wants to try to write like that and thinks they can until they realize they can't. Manuel knows this because him and I listen to each other's stuff whenever we're working on our own solo material. He listens to the shit I write and he knows that I am trying my absolute hardest to be Thank You Scientist, and I know I can't. Because it's just impossible.
It's okay though, Yusuf. We
it is
love
okay.
You anyway.
It is okay. Thank you, Brendan. It is okay because it's an appreciation for bands that are so what's the word I'm looking for? So just themselves. There's nothing else like that. There's a lot of bands that are trying to be a lot more like them, which is awesome. We need more of that in the world. But man, it's hard to replicate a band like Thank You Scientist. Yeah. We should probably wrap up soon because you guys got to go. Yeah. But no, I mean,
I do want to.
If there are anything we can talk about, about.
There's a moment at 2 minutes and 20 seconds in where this album has a lot of very clever use of lo-fi vocals to create contrast. That was one spot that stuck out at me, where it kind of pulls back a little bit, not all the way, but the fact that they lo-fied the vocals a little bit makes everything around it feel way bigger when it comes back in to the normal. Yeah, the normal vocals, which I thought was really, really cool.
Well, as I know, Sally uses a processor on his mic. He has a board for it whenever they play live. I don't know if this is true or not. I do want to ask the guys again if I ever get the chance if this is true. I know on Fox Mulder in the beginning of that, he uses a megaphone for those vocals. And apparently for all those other parts and different songs, he used a megaphone.
I believe it. That's another song that does that very hard, but it's a great way. You don't really tend to think about how much the range of the frequency spectrum that you're taking up affects the way you perceive something. Where if you just cut a little bit off the top and bottom, when you bring that back in, it's big again.
Yeah,
right.
I think one thing to talk about with Terraformer is there's so many little callbacks to previous things on that same album, just little licks and whatnot that you kind of don't think about until after, and you're like, interesting, where'd that come from? And the way they end the song is a very prototypical Thank You Scientist way, where it goes back to the chorus, It's just that hard-hitting way back in, and it feels like it's very happy. You're ready to be done. The adventure's going to end soon. It's the same thing with, if you look at maps, it's the same way with My Fame Disappearing Act, how it ends. Because, it just goes back to that wild tapping like that Tom does. The drums are just driving out the end. And it's got that very bouncy, you're ready to be done kind of feeling. And it's cute that they do that because they know, this is where we call it. We're done after this. We swear we don't have another surprise coming.
Haken does that a lot, too, with the references, little bouncy, fun stuff between the surprises.
Yeah. Brendan, anything you would like to quickly talk about? So we have probably 5 minutes.
I would say that, we basically kind of cover all the points. Just, for me, the whole of the song is brilliant. But for me, no matter what you take into it, the best part of the whole song is the transition into it. Because it is setting a tone of everything. And I really don't know how much more of a spin I can put on it. I think that, the only thing I could say is if this is your first time hearing about Thank You Scientist, or if it's your first time hearing about Kitty, this is your time to go onto Spotify and go check out those bands because you're going to have a good time. I personally think, and if you don't have a bad time, well, guess what? Just don't do it again. There you go. There's the solution to your problem. To wrap it, I don't really think I have anything else to add to it because it's just objectively something that you can't really put to words. You just got to go listen to the song, go have fun with it, and just be ready to be punched in the face with a tube sock full of nickels and musical notes.
Well said.
Very,
Absolutely.
very well said. And I think it's a great way to just wrap up everything and end the show here. And on that note, of course, the usual plugs, where to find us. I'm not even going to bring it up at this point. If you listen to this show enough, I'll put things down in the description so you can see it there. But on that note, this has been a fun episode. I knew we were going to go off the rails with this one. I friggin' knew of all things we were going to go off the rails with Thank You Scientist. But that's okay because they deserve it. They deserve that.
And if you are a local New Jersey metal band and you want to talk about your stuff with us, just reach out to us.
Yeah.
Come hang. Come talk to us. Come promote your music.
You can come promote your music. Reach out at airbornesealife@gmail.com. And just find us there and just hit us up and just have a chat.
And then we'll all be friends.
And we'll all be friends. And we ended it with friendship. Yay, friendship. And with that being said, I'm not going to I was going to say something so dumb. With that being said, this has been another episode of the Airborne Sealife podcast. Of course, all things metal, all things nonsense, all things fun, very fun. And we will see you next week. Bye-bye.